Single dad carried the CEO from the wreck. Days later, she bought the bank, taking his house. The night it happened, a freezing rain had turned the river road to glass, and the silver car that came around the bend too fast went through the guardrail and down the embankment and rolled once and came to rest on its roof at the edge of the black water. And the only person who saw it happen was a man in an old tow truck named Finn Gallagher, who did not slow down to decide whether to stop. He was 39. Lean and quick and strong through the shoulders, with fair, freckled, weather-reddened skin, a thick shock of copper-red hair gone darker at the temples, a short red-blonde beard, and pale blue-green eyes that had seen a great many bad nights and gone calm instead of hard. He wore a canvas work coat over a fire department t-shirt gone soft with washing, heavy boots, and on his left hand a plain wedding band he had not taken off in the 2 years since Bridget died. He drove a tow truck now and pulled the night calls because they paid a little more. And he did the work the way he did everything, without hurry and without complaint, and he never told anyone, because it did not come up when you were hooking a chain to a stranger's bumper that he had once been a fire captain, and that there were people walking around the county who were alive because of his hands. He was out of the truck and down the embankment before his own door finished swinging. The silver car was filling with the cold river through a broken window, the woman inside upside down in her belt and not moving, and there was the sharp smell of fuel on the freezing air. Finn did not think about the fuel, because thinking about the fuel is how you freeze, and freezing is how people die. His hips screamed on the slick rock the way it had screamed every day for 4 years, and he ignored it the way he had learned to, and he got the door against the pull of the water, and got the belt with the little folding knife he still carried out of habit from another life, and got an arm under her, and he carried her up that glass embankment with the river pulling at his boots and his bad hip, threatening to put them both back down it, and laid her on the gravel shoulder away from the car, and put his coat over her, and got her breathing steady and her airway clear, with hands that remembered exactly what to do, though it had been 3 years since they were paid to. The ambulance found them like that, the woman coming around in the freezing rain and a red-haired stranger kneeling over her saying, "You're all right now. You're all right. Help's here." And when the medics took over, Finn told them what he'd found and what he'd done in the clipped shorthand of a man they slowly realized was one of their own. And then he stepped back and got in his truck and drove home, because it was nearly midnight and his daughter was asleep at the neighbor's and he had not given anyone his name. In the cab of the tow truck, clipped to the visor, was a folded sheet of construction paper with a child's drawing on it, a house and a sun and 2 stick figures holding hands. And the woman never saw it, and he did not stay to show her. Cassandra Wynne woke in a hospital 2 days later with a concussion, a broken wrist, and a single clear memory floating in the fog of the rest, red hair against a gray sky, a calm voice telling her she was all right when she very much was not, and the strange, specific weight of being carried by someone who knew how. She was 51 and ran Wynne Holdings, which owned pieces of a great many things. And she was not a woman who was carried anywhere by anyone, and she could not stop thinking about it. She had her people find him. It was not hard. The responder log had a tow company, and the tow company had a name, and the name was Finn Gallagher, a volunteer firefighter who had stopped on his way home and pulled her from a car the troopers said she'd have drowned in inside 4 minutes. She meant, at first, only to thank him, the way you settle an enormous debt with a check large enough to make it stop mattering. So she had her people look into him to know what would help. And what came back stopped her cold, because the man who had carried her from the river was 9 days from losing his house. The file her people built was a quiet horror told in dates. Finn Gallagher, fire captain, decorated, had gone through a floor 4 years ago, carrying a child out of a row house and shattered a hip on the way down, and the injury had ended the career he loved, and he had taken the pension and the tow truck and not complained. Then, his wife, Bridget, a school nurse, had been diagnosed, and the treatment had been brutal and long and only partly covered. And he had spent everything and then borrowed against the house to buy her another year, and she had died anyway 2 years ago, and left him with a daughter and a mortgage and a grief that did not leave room for paperwork. He had fallen behind. He had caught up. He had fallen behind again. And somewhere in there, the bank that held his loan, Meridian Savings, had stopped working with him and started working against him, and the file showed a foreclosure moving with a speed and a certainty that did not match a man who, the records also showed, had made 9 of his last 12 payments and begged in writing for a plan for the other 3. Cassandra Wynne had bought and sold 100 companies, and she knew the difference between a bank collecting a debt and a bank running a play. This was a play. And the man it was being run on had carried her up a frozen embankment and not waited for thanks. She went to find him herself on a Tuesday, driving out to a small house at the end of a dead-end street with a foreclosure notice already taped to the door. And Finn Gallagher answered in a flannel shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder, and he did not recognize her at first because the last time he'd seen her she'd been upside down in a river. "You're the woman from the car," he said when he placed her, and something in him eased and worried at the same time. "You're all right. I'm glad. You didn't have to come all the way out to say it. You pulled me out of the river and put your coat on me and left before I could learn your name," Cassandra said. "I came to thank you. And then I had my people look into how I could help you, the way rich people do, thinking I'd write a check and feel better. And I found out a bank is about to take your house in 9 days, Mr. Gallagher, and I don't think they're doing it honestly. And I'm not a woman who can unsee a thing like that." From inside, a small voice said, "Dad, the water's boiling," and a girl of about 8 appeared at his elbow, red-haired like him, with a frank way of looking at the fancy woman on the step. "This is Posey," Finn said. "Posey, this is the lady I helped the other night. Go turn the burner down, love. I'll be right there." The girl studied Cassandra a moment and went. Finn looked at the woman on his step, and then, because she had not come with pity and he could hear the difference, he stepped back and let her in. At the kitchen table, with Posey doing homework in the next room, he told her the shape of it without making it sound like more than it was, because he had never in his life made a thing sound like more than it was. The hip, the pension, Bridget, the bills, the borrowing, the falling behind. "I'm not asking for sympathy," he said. "Half the county's a missed paycheck from where I am. But I'll tell you the part that doesn't sit right." He got up and brought a shoebox of papers to the table, a man's whole catastrophe in a shoebox, and laid out the canceled checks. "I paid. Most months I paid. The months I couldn't, I wrote them, I called them, I asked for the plan they're legally supposed to offer, and a man named Maddox at the regional office told me people like me always think the rules don't apply, and they sent the payments back and called me in default." He set down a letter. "And then this came. Says I was offered a plan and turned it down in writing. I never was. I never did. There's a signature on it says I declined. I didn't sign that. I'd have signed anything they put in front of me to keep this house. It's the last thing of Bridget's I've got that they can't take to a hospital." Cassandra picked up the letter and looked at the signature. And then she looked at the canceled checks, the careful record of a drowning man trying to keep his footing, and she made a decision the way she made all her best ones, all at once and completely. Brett Maddox was 48 and was the regional vice president for loss mitigation at Meridian Savings, which was a title that was supposed to mean helping people stay in their homes and had come to mean, under Brett Maddox, the opposite. He had discovered some years back that the most profitable thing a regional officer could do was not to work out troubled loans, but to push them to foreclosure as fast as the law could be made to allow. And faster than that where no one was watching. Because a foreclosed house could be sold to a flipping outfit that took care of the officers who fed it, and a widow or a wounded firefighter or a sick old man was far less likely than a corporation to have the money or the strength to fight. So Brett Maddox ran a mill. His people refused payments to manufacture defaults, tacked on fees the borrowers never owed, and when the law required proof that the bank had offered a struggling borrower a workout, they simply manufactured the proof. Robo-signing affidavits by the hundred and, when a particular file needed it, forging the borrower's own signature onto a refusal he had never made. The Gallagher file had needed it. Because Gallagher kept paying and kept writing and would not stop trying, and a man like that was a problem unless you could put a piece of paper in the record that said he'd been offered help and turned it down. So Maddox had a refusal forged with the firefighter's name and scheduled the auction and moved on to the next one, because there was always a next one, and none of them had ever been able to do anything about it. He had not counted on the firefighter pulling a billionaire out of a river. Cassandra Wynne did not write Finn a check. She did something that took her 3 days and a great deal of money and a phone call to every banker she had ever frightened. She bought Meridian Savings. Quietly, through a holding vehicle, before anyone at the bank understood what was happening, she acquired a controlling interest in the institution that was 9 days from auctioning the house of the man who had saved her life. And on the 4th day she walked into the regional office unannounced as the bank's new owner. She did not move against Maddox in the dark, though she had learned long ago that you build the thing completely before you swing it. So her people went looking, and they found, as you always find when a man runs a mill, that someone inside it had been sickened by it for a long time. A loan servicing clerk named Gloria Pierce, who had processed foreclosures for Meridian for 11 years and had stopped sleeping well about 3 years into it, met Cassandra in a parking lot and handed her a thumb drive she had been quietly filling for 2 years, the robo-signing logs, the manufactured fees, the affidavits signed by a vice president who was actually a temp paid by the signature. And, in a folder of her own, the Gallagher file, with a printout clipped to it that Gloria had saved the day it crossed her desk because it had made her physically ill. An email from Brett Maddox to the foreclosure desk. 1 line. Robo signed the Gallagher affidavit and forged the workout refusal. Deny the reinstatement. I want that auction cleared Friday. Cassandra held the page and felt the cold of it, because it was one thing to suspect a man was a predator, and another to read him being won in a single tidy sentence about a widower's house. She went back to the dead-end street on a Thursday, and this time Posey opened the door first and looked up and said, "Are you the lady Dad pulled out of the river?" Because children go straight at the thing, and Finn came in from the back with sawdust on his hands from fixing the one step that had always wobbled, as though a man 9 days from losing a house would still fix its broken step, which is exactly the kind of man he was. Cassandra laid the forged refusal and the email and the canceled checks on the table, and he understood at once. He read it slowly, the load-bearing part first, the way a fire officer reads a building. When he saw the email, Robo signed the Gallagher affidavit and forged the workout refusal, and understood that his catastrophe had not been bad luck, but a decision a man had made about him at a desk. He set his scarred hand flat on the table and held it there, and his jaw worked, and then the breath went out of him, and his hand opened again, deliberate. The way of a man who had decided a long time ago not to make a fist in front of his daughter. Then he looked at the forged refusal, at the signature meant to be his, for a long moment. "That isn't my hand," he said quietly. "It's close. He got the F wrong. Bridget used to laugh at my F. I make it like a little flag. She said it was the only fancy thing about me. Whoever traced this made a plain one, a careful one. A man in a hurry copying a shape. He's been taking houses with my name on a lie, and he never once knew how I sign it. He almost smiled, and it did not reach anywhere. I kept thinking it was me. 2 years I thought I'd failed her, that I couldn't even keep the roof she died under. And it was a man at a desk the whole time, deciding I was easy. Posey had drifted over and held up a fresh drawing, the way she did with people she had decided about. 3 figures now. A man, a girl, and a woman with red hair, holding hands under a yellow sun. Cassandra took it in both hands like it was something that might break. She had not been given anything for free in a very long time, and certainly not by a child whose home was 9 days from being sold. Finn watched his daughter, and then he watched the woman holding the drawing, and the thing that had been clenched in him for 2 years loosened by one notch. "I bought the bank," Cassandra said, because there was no soft way to say it. 3 days ago. Meridian is mine now. I didn't do it only for you, though you're the reason I looked. I did it because there are a lot of Gallagher files, Mr. Gallagher, and I own all of them now, and I intend to open every one. Finn looked at her for a long moment. "You bought a bank," he said. "I've bought worse for stupider reasons," Cassandra said. "This is the first one I'm sure of." Brett Maddox learned that the bank had been sold out from under him, and that the new owner had been seen with a clerk named Pierce, and he moved the way frightened men with a lot to hide move, which is to say he tried to destroy records that were already copied and to schedule the Gallagher auction even faster to get it done before the new ownership could take hold. The auction was set for Friday on the courthouse steps, the way these things were, quick and quiet and final. A man's home sold to a flipper for a fraction of its worth while he was at work. Cassandra learned of the rushed auction and did not stop it through a memo. She let it proceed to the steps, because some things have to happen where people can see them. That night Finn took Posey to Bridget's mother's, the way he did when a thing was coming, and he stood in the doorway and told the old woman to keep the girl close, and Posey held his sleeve. "Are we going to lose the house, Dad?" she asked, because she was 8 and not stupid and had read the notice on the door herself. "No, love," he said. "I thought we might. But it turns out the lady from the river is a harder woman to drown than they figured, and she's on our side now. We're going to be all right." And for the first time in 2 years he believed it as he said it, and the girl heard him believe it, which was the thing she had needed most. That night, for the first time since the funeral, he took the small fire department box down from the closet shelf, where he had put away the rest of who he'd been. His captain's badge. A commendation for the row house fire, the one that broke his hip and saved a child who would be in high school now. A photograph of Bridget in her school nurse's cardigan, laughing, a line of kindergartners holding her hands. He sat with it a while, and he did not cry. He had done that. 2 years of it in a truck cab where Posey couldn't see, but something clenched in him let go by 1 degree, because he understood finally that he had not failed her. A man had decided to take her house, and that was a thing done to him, not a thing he had failed to prevent, and the difference was the difference between shame and anger at last he could use. He left the box down off the shelf where he could reach it. The auction came up on the courthouse steps on Friday morning, gray and cold, a handful of flippers with their phones and their coffee, a tired clerk with a clipboard, the small machinery by which a house becomes a number. Brett Maddox had come himself, to be sure of it, standing at the back in a good coat, and he did not see, at first, the woman who came up the steps in a coat worth more than the house being sold until she was at the clerk's elbow. The clerk called the Gallagher property. And Cassandra Wynne said clearly, so that it carried, "This auction is canceled. I'm the owner of Meridian Savings, the bank that brought it, and the bank withdraws it." The flippers looked up from their phones. Brett Maddox came forward fast, smooth, smiling the smile of a man who had handled surprises before. "There's a process, ma'am," he said, not yet knowing who she was. "You can't just, Brett Maddox," Cassandra said, and watched the name land on him like cold water. "I'm Cassandra Wynne. I bought your bank on Tuesday. And I know exactly what you can and can't just do, because I've spent 3 days reading what you've been doing for years." She turned to the small crowd, and to the clerk, and to a reporter Gloria Pierce had quietly called. This man ran a foreclosure mill out of a savings bank. He refused people's payments to manufacture defaults. He charged fees they never owed. And when the law required proof he'd offered a struggling family a way to stay in their home, he forged it. He forged a refusal with this man's name on it, and Finn Gallagher came up the steps then, in the one suit he owned, the one he'd buried Bridget in, and stood beside her. A man who made 9 of his last 12 payments and begged in writing for a plan, and who, 2 weeks ago, pulled me out of a river and didn't stay long enough to give his name. She had it all, because she had built it completely. Gloria Pierce's drive on a screen the reporter could see, the robo-signing logs, the manufactured fees, and then the forged refusal beside a dozen of Finn's real signatures. The little flag on the F he made and the forger hadn't, the difference ringed in red. And then the email, one-line robo-sign the Gallagher affidavit and forge the workout refusal, deny the reinstatement, I want that auction cleared Friday. "He got the F wrong," Finn said into the cold morning, and his voice did not rise. "My wife used to tease me about that F. He took houses from sick people and widows and a man with a busted hip. And he never once thought any of us would have someone in our corner who'd read the signature." He looked at the flippers with their coffee, not with anger, but with something worse for them, recognition. "Those are the houses people died in," he said, "where they raised kids and buried parents. They're not numbers on your phone. I'd like that on the record." The silence had weight. Brett Maddox's smooth face had gone the color of the paper the lies were printed on. "You're a tow truck driver," he said to Finn, the contempt surfacing one last time before it drowned. "People like you, people like me carried her up an embankment," Finn said quietly, "while people like you forged my name at a desk. I know which one of us the rules were really written for now. I didn't used to." Cassandra Wynne turned to the investigators she had brought, who had been waiting at the edge of the steps. "Mr. Maddox is finished at this bank and everywhere else," she said. "The forged affidavits, the manufactured defaults, the kickbacks, and his own instructions in writing are with the Attorney General and the banking regulator as of this morning." And Brett Maddox, who had taken so many homes from so many people too tired to fight, walked to the investigators without resistance, which was somehow worse than if he had run. In the weeks after, the story moved through the financial press and then everywhere, because a billionaire quietly buying a whole bank to save the one man who pulled her from a river is the kind of story the world is starving for. Maddox was charged with fraud, forgery, and a scheme that reached further than even Cassandra had guessed, and the flipping outfit that had fed on the foreclosures went down with him. Cassandra declined every interview and gave one written statement, 11 sentences long, and signed her name to it. She did not stop at Finn's house. She opened every file Maddox had touched, hundreds of them, and where homes could still be saved, she saved them, and where they were already gone, she made the bank make it right. And she sat in a lot of small kitchens that month and listened to a lot of people tell her what it had cost them to be treated as easy. And she did not interrupt. Then she rebuilt Meridian into something her board found baffling, a bank that measured its officers by how many families they kept in their homes, and she started a fund to fight predatory foreclosure and to stand behind borrowers a bank had decided were too tired to fight. and named it the Bridget Gallagher Fund after a school nurse she had never met who had held kindergartners' hands before she had told Finn she was going to. Finn Gallagher kept his house, the wobbly step got fixed for good, and the foreclosure notice came down off the door and went into the wood stove where Posey got to be the one to burn it, and he framed, instead in the spot by the door where you couldn't miss it, the canceled checks. All of them. The careful record of a man who had never stopped trying, because Posey had asked him to, so that she would always know her father had not failed them. He went back to the volunteer company and pulled his toe shifts, and because Cassandra asked him to and he could not think of a good reason to say no, he took a role at the New Meridian too. A strange and perfect one. The person who sat across from families in trouble and figured out how to keep them in their homes, the exact job Brett Maddox's title had always claimed to be. Done at last by a man who knew from the inside what it was to be drowning and have someone reach in. He was good at it, because the work asked nothing of him but care, and care was the one thing he had never run out of. On a gray morning in March, Cassandra drove him to the cemetery where Bridget was buried, and she stayed 3 steps back while he crouched and set something on the grass before the stone, one of the canceled checks, laminated against the weather, for no reason he could have explained, except every reason. She heard him say, low, not quite to anyone, "I kept it. Bridget, the house, the one you died in. I almost lost it, but I kept it. And then, softer, it wasn't me that failed. Love, I finally know that. A man lied, and a stranger I pulled out of a river wouldn't let him." He did not say more. Cassandra did not come closer. She understood that her place at that moment was not nearer, and that there are things a man says to a stone that a living person is only allowed to stand near, and not inside. Cassandra started coming by the house on the weekends, first with bank business and then with none, and she traded her tailored coats for an old jacket of Finn's that swallowed her, and learned the names of Posey's library books, and let the girl beat her at a card game whose rules changed whenever Posey was losing. One evening she watched Finn teach Posey to tie the knots he'd learned in the fire service, his scarred hands over the girl's small ones, slow, no wasted motion. The same calm she had felt when he carried her up the embankment. You tie it like a life depends on it, he told her, even when it doesn't, because then your hands know how when it does. Posey tied the knot and pulled it tight and looked up at him with the pride of a child trusted with a real thing, and Cassandra, watching from the doorway with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, understood that this was the whole of him. That the fire captain and the tow driver and the father were one steady man all the way down, and that the night her car went into the river, the universe had, for once that night, put exactly the right stranger on the road. On a clear Saturday in spring, the 3 of them painted the house, the whole front of it, a color Posey chose that was far too bright and exactly right. Finn on the ladder, Posey doing the parts she could reach and several she couldn't, Cassandra in the swallowing jacket cutting in the edges with a steadiness that surprised her. And a fire engine from Finn's old company drove past slow and gave one whoop of the siren in salute, because the whole county knew the story now. Posey looked down from the porch rail and asked, "Are you going to stay with us forever?" Of Cassandra, the way children ask the questions adults are too careful to, and Cassandra glanced up the ladder at Finn, who had stopped painting and was looking down at her, and she said, "I'm thinking about it." Finn came down the ladder and sent Posey to find the small brush, and the girl ran off, and he stood in front of Cassandra with paint on his hands and the bright new color of the house behind him. "You don't have to promise a child something you haven't promised yourself," he said. "Especially this one. She picked you the night you came to the door." "I'm promising both of them," Cassandra said, at the same time. He looked at her a long moment, this woman he had pulled half drowned from a river who had turned around and pulled his whole life back from the edge. Then he raised his hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the back of one paint-stained knuckle, the first time he had touched her on purpose since the embankment. She did not pull back. He did not move closer. It was a moment, no more, but it was long enough for both of them to know it had finally arrived. Posey came back with the wrong brush and a great deal of paint on herself and slipped one bright blue hand into her father's and one into Cassandra's and tugged them back to admire the too bright house the way she did. As if this had always been the arrangement and she had only been waiting for the grown-ups to catch up. By summer the house was the brightest on the street and the step never wobbled again, and Posey had her own small set of fire knot ropes she practiced on the porch until her knots were better than half the rookies. And the photograph of the woman in the nurse's cardigan with the line of children sat in a frame where Finn could see it from his chair. Cassandra let most of the old life go. The boards, the acquisitions, the rooms where a home was only collateral on a spreadsheet, and she found by the third month that she did not miss any of it, and that she slept better in a too bright house at the end of a dead-end street than she ever had in any of the places she owned. A man had carried a stranger up a frozen embankment and asked for nothing, while 9 days from losing the only house his wife had ever made a home. Some people are worth exactly what they can pay a bank on the first of the month, and not $1 more. Others run down an icy bank into a black river for a stranger and never wait around to give their name. And you only learn what those hands are worth when the woman they saved goes out and buys the whole bank that called them easy.